Dr. KELEKUME leads sessions in the microeconomic, macroeconomic environment of business and agribusiness at Lagos Business School. He obtained his doctoral degree in economics from the Swiss Management Center, SMC University, Switzerland. An economist with over 22 years of teaching experience in training and facilitating. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Dr. KELEKUME.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here. When Pastor Poju was talking about the seasons and time, one thing I picked there is that we must understand the time. If it is possible to ask us this morning, what exactly is the time saying? He talked about he defined time in two ways. The one that I picked is when he talked about the season. What exactly is the season saying when it comes to agriculture and agribusiness? If we look at what is happening around us, it's simply telling us that there's hunger in the land. And I recall that he said, don't even blame anybody. Don't look at what the government is doing. Just think about what God is saying, what God is speaking to us right now. The season is so tough. 6 years ago, a bag of rice was sold for 8,000 naira. Today, it is going for, a bag of foreign rice was sold for 8,000 naira. Today, it is going for between 28 and 30,000. A bag of 50 kg bag was sold for, of basmati rice was sold for 8,000 naira 6 years ago. It's a 10 kg bag of basmati rice that is sold for that price today. So if you look at other agricultural produce, today we've seen that a tuber of yam, you now split it to sell in the market. It used to be a whole tuber, so they now split it for people to be able to do what? To buy. So it tells you that the times have actually changed. So what is happening here is that we are actually not producing. We are not producing anything. And that's why we need to go back to the roots, agriculture. So because I have 30 minutes, I'm going to move very, very fast. I'll move very fast, and I may not cover all the things that I put there in my slide. But I'll try to cover at least 80% of what we have there. So when the moderator was introducing me, he said, oh, here comes the teacher and the student. He said the student is the entrepreneur that is practicing. He didn't realize that the teacher is also practicing. So I am a farmer. I am a teacher, teach economics, teach agribusiness. I'm also a farmer. I'm a snail farmer. I'm also into crop production. Currently have about 1,500 palms. I'm moving towards about 6,000 palms. Hoping to retire in the next 5-6 years. Then I'll go into full-time active farming. So we're talking about agriculture and agribusiness. And we're talking about, if you look at the title, building a viable and resilient agriculture. How do we recover? Looking at the times and looking at the seasons and looking at what has happened in Nigeria, given the prices of commodities, basic agricultural commodities. So AGRIC is one of the oldest professions in the world. It is one of the oldest professions in the world. We can trace it to the beginning, to Genesis. Specifically, we can trace it to Genesis 1:11, where God said, let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bears fruit with seed in it according to their various kinds. And it was so. It means that the first profession probably would take the first profession to be what? To agriculture. So agriculture is as old as man. There's been a lot of talk currently about the potentials of the agricultural the agribusiness sector. Some school of thought have said it is the next gold mine. They said agriculture is the next gold mine. Some even said agriculture holds the key to unlocking the African economy, not just the Nigerian economy. And if you look at that quote that says, by 2030, the size of food and agribusiness in Africa will reach 1 trillion. So if you're thinking of how to make money, the sector to play is the agricultural sector. That it will reach $1 trillion that the sector to play, that's Adewumi, talking about the agricultural sector. But it takes understanding to build a resilient agricultural sector. It takes real understanding to understand the time. The sector, as it is currently structured, is one of the least understood sectors. So the objective of this session is to draw attention to how we can build a viable agriculture or agribusiness sector. So if you look at the typical agricultural sector is made up of 4 sectors. We have crop, livestock, forestry, and fishery. And when we begin to look at the dimension of this sector, it is such that agriculture is usually misconstrued to mean the same thing as agribusiness. The term agriculture simply means the art or occupation concerned with land cultivation, planting and raising of crops, feeding, breeding and raising of livestock, fishery and aquaculture, then planting of what? Tree crops, planting of long gestation cycle crops. Now, if you look at the structure of agriculture, it is structured into 4 sectors: crop, livestock, forestry, and fishery. The dimension of the remaining 3 other sectors actually takes 11% of the share of agricultural GDP. The ecosystem is such that it is dominated by 80% smallholder farmers. So you have 80% smallholder farmer and 20% medium to large-scale farmers. So it is skewed in the direction of small-time players and subsistence farmers. So Nigeria has more persons today. If you look at the importance of this sector, if you look at the AGRIC ecosystem, Nigeria today has more persons engaged in the agricultural sector. The interesting numbers shows that we have about 34.7% of our active working population engaged in that space. When you look at that chart, you will see that there's a difference between the developing world and the underdeveloped or emerging market economy. Specifically, if you look at Egypt and Nigeria, you will see that more people are engaged in the agricultural sector. However, when you look at the sector productivity, currently you have about 50% post-harvest losses within the agric space. So it speaks volume when we're looking at the agricultural sector and we're asking questions. Why is it that we employ so many people, yet we don't produce as much as United Kingdom, we don't produce as much as Canada, we don't produce as much as France, that has less than 2% of their active population, active working population in the agricultural sector. So the number actually speaks volume when you look at the agricultural sector. The question then is, how can this narrative be changed? How do we thin down the numbers such that we can have fewer people engaged in smart agriculture? So a lot of discussion today centers around agribusiness ecosystem. A lot of talk about agriculture and agribusiness. But exactly what is agribusiness? What is the agribusiness ecosystem? Is it different from is it different from agricultural ecosystem? How can the country leverage on its abundant resources to build a viable and resilient agricultural / agribusiness ecosystem? So the typical, when I talked about agriculture, I said it is made up of 4 sectors: crop, livestock, forestry, and fishery. Of the 4, forestry takes about 1%, fishery takes about 2%, whilst you have fishery takes about 2%, forestry takes about 1%. So if you add those 3 other sectors, they actually take about 11%, which shows that the sectors are actually not doing well. Now, the one that is doing well, which is the crop, which takes about 89%, about 50% of our produce, is lost annually to post-harvest losses. When you now add banditry, kidnapping, insecurity into what is happening today in Nigeria, you will discover that over 60 to 70% of what we produce actually don't get to the market. And even when they get to the market, they're actually wasted, because we do not have secondary industry that will appropriate those wastes and turn them into raw material for the industrial sector. But when you now look at the agribusiness sector, ecosystem, it is made up of what? 4 sectors, just like the agricultural sector. We have the pre-upstream, we have the upstream, we have the midstream, we have the downstream. Now, if we look at this in terms of the pre-upstream, we need to understand this to know that agriculture is a subset of agribusiness. So we need to understand this by looking at this chart. Looking at the upstream, it speaks volume to research, to education, to land management, to irrigation management, to pest and disease control management, to quality control, to infrastructure, good road network, to quality testing, to education. Now, who are the active participants here? You have our universities, you have the governments, the NGOs, the AGRIC institutions, the research institutions, development banks. This is where you find the central bank. This is where you find the Bank of Industry, the Bank of AGRIC. Now, what exactly do? They provide, we call them the pre-upstream sector because they actually what? They are precursors to the upstream. The upstream is direct farming, where you have a direct farming in crop production, in livestock, in forestry, and in fishery. The interesting part of it is that for those of us that are seated here, if you choose to go into farming today, and you're looking at the upstream, let's take cassava, you're going into cassava. You're looking at the upstream space, you're going into cassava. There are about 46 varieties of cassava. About 46 varieties of cassava. The question then is, which one am I producing? Why am I going into cassava? Am I going into cassava because I want to make fufu? Am I going into cassava because I want to make ethanol? Am I going into cassava because I want to make industrial starch? Am I going into cassava because I'm thinking of making feed for animals? So the question then becomes broader. When you look at the pre-upstream, if the research institutes have actually not done much in the area of what? Researching the best kind of crop. If the government has not done its own work in the area of irrigation, providing water, it means that you, the farmer that is going into the upstream, you're going to be led by what? Rain-fed irrigation. You're going to faith it. You will start at the beginning of the farming season, faithing it that, oh God, let there be rain. And we know that times have actually changed. We know that climate change has actually set in. We know that the seasons no longer follow that order of the rainy season and the dry season. We are in the dry season now, we're still seeing rain. It means something has to give. Now, if that pre-upstream sector has not been addressed, if we have not been properly educated, if we've not been taught about agriculture, if we've not been told that agriculture is 70% science, if we've not been told that agriculture is 70% science, is 20% experiential learning. Somebody must hold your hand. And it's 10% passion. If we've not been told all of this, and we are jumping into cultivation of cassava, we are going to be frustrated. If we've not been told that the egusi that we eat, the melon that we eat, that the process of making the melon is very cumbersome. If I tell us how we produce egusi, many of us will not eat it because you need maggots, you need worms to ferment that egusi because they cut them and leave them for worms, maggots to go in and ferment the pod before you start dipping your hands into those messy maggots to take out your egusi. So if we tell you the process, you probably will not eat it. If we also tell you that if you're going to plant 3 crops, remember I talked about forestry, 1%. If you're going to plant 3 crops, there are certain 3 crops that when you plant them today, you're going to expect returns in 50 years. How many of us will have that incentive to plant the likes of obeche, mahogany, timber, iroko? You know why the Chinese are leading us today? Whilst we're having, in those days, you have your woodwork. There are states that were known for woodwork. Edo State was known for woodwork. Delta known for woodwork. Cross River, Calabar known for woodwork. Today, they are no longer known for woodwork. They are now known for selling things, for selling cooked wood from China, from Turkey, from Spain. All these things are coming into our country because we have left what? The upstream. Now, because something is happening, the pre-upstream sector has been left undefined. So this is why everyone that jumps into fishery, one of the things we share in class is that for every 20 farmers that enter the fishery value chain, without the knowledge, without the understanding, at the end of 2 years, you're likely to find only 3 left because they've invested, they literally buried money without understanding what they are doing. So agriculture, the upstream value chain, is a knowledge-based sector. If we take the livestock sector and we ask you, the milk, the dairy sector, the milk that you take, what percentage, what proportion of the raw materials for making milk come from your milk from your livestock sector? Only about 1%. So you're looking at 99% what? Imports. So all this speaks volume to what exactly are we doing? How do we move our country looking at our current population? Where you find a lot of players is the midstream. The midstream is where you talk about logistics, trade association, distribution and fabrication, agro-journalism, commodity exchange, people who are engaged in buying and selling. Whilst the downstream is where you find the multinationals, the likes of Olam's. Again, today they are playing across horizontally, looking at, if you look at Olam's, when they started from the downstream, but today they are operating across what? Across the value chain. They are operating in the pre-upstream. They're actually preparing, testing. They're into research into what they are going to export. So this speaks volume to the agri-business value chain. So if we take these two streams, no small-scale or medium-scale player has the capacity to invest in the pre-upstream value chain. Without a clear roadmap on how the pre-upstream challenges can be addressed, Nigeria will remain a poor agrarian economy. If we take the upstream, direct farming in crop, livestock, forestry, and fishery is currently prone to all kinds of issues. And some of these issues are beyond the control of the smallholder farmers. Issues such as theft. I'm a snail farmer. It takes approximately 2 to 3 years. You know, they tell you all kinds of stories online that you're going to make super money when you go into this business. Once you start, it takes approximately 2 to 3 years to grow that snail. That snail that you probably will sell, if you go to those hotels, the one they sell to you for 1,500. It takes about 3 years to grow it. They are pests. They eat everything and their parts. So the question is, how are you going to feed them in 3 years? So it takes approximately 3 years to grow it. And after you must have grown it, remember that they are slow-moving creatures. They sleep in the daytime, they are active at night. So at night, those thieves can actually wait for you because they are slow-moving, they can easily pick them. So we've had cases where one night they can raid a farm and pick everything. You've waited for how many years? 3 years. And somebody comes in and moves everything in a night. So we have issues of theft, kidnapping, adverse weather condition, soil salinity problem. You want to plant, you've not tested the soil. And they ask you, how much will it cost me to do soil tests? The smallholder farmer cannot count out 500,000 naira to do soil tests. He's just a smallholder farmer. He can barely aggregate 2 plots of land. So where do you expect him to find 500,000 to do soil tests, to talk about the salinity of the soil, irrigation, pest control, and diseases and quality seeds? Again, it is what we call it, when you look at computing, we say garbage in, garbage out. When you plant the wrong seed, what you're going to harvest is poor yield. So what we find, sometimes I call it vagabond seed. We plant the seed expecting good results, we don't get good results. So, but again, who addresses this problem? The pre-upstream. It is the pre-upstream that has the capacity to address all of these problems that we are seeing, that is coming up in the upstream value chain. So these problems are beyond the smallholder farmer, so beyond them. That is why in most countries, you talk about subsidies and grants, that government will come in to give what? Subsidies. Government will check the kind of seed that they are actually using as planting seed. So in terms of the ecosystem, the challenge is which is far from funding. You know, one of the things we say when you hear young people talk about agriculture is that, oh, because I don't have fund, that is why I have not started. Your problem is not funding. Funding is the least of your worry in agriculture. This is a sector where if we give you 50 million, you can literally bury 50 million and you won't find it under 2 years. Especially when you go into a sector that requires you building infrastructure. Take, for example, the fish farmer. The fish farmer goes into building the pond. Now, that pond he's building, you're going to use concrete, you're going to use cement. If you're not using cement, you're using expensive tarpaulin that is imported. So you're also going to create a water treatment plant. You're going to drill your borehole because the water from your borehole will actually kill your fish. So you're going to treat all of these things. Then you're going to fence. See, you have not started business, but you're sinking what? You're sinking money. You're sinking money. You're building a farmhouse. You're building your fence. You're building the pond. By the time you're now ready for business, you discover that the proportion, the amount of money you require to buy fish and fingerling is so small compared to the amount of money you have used for what? Your infrastructure. And this is where the problem comes in. You have spent 20 million putting the infrastructure. You're only spending 1 million on fingerling and fish. By the time your first harvest comes in the first 3 months, and you're looking at the profit will be in the neighborhood of 100,000, or sometimes it's a loss. So you're looking at, I sank 20 million, and here am I, I'm picking 100,000 with all my effort. And this is why you see abandoned ponds. People get frustrated after doing it 2 times. They ask God, you didn't show me this kind of business. How did I come into... So these challenges, which is far from funding and putting money in the hands of smallholder. You know, this is the narrative. Your anchor borrowers fund. Give money to smallholder farmers. Push money to these guys' hands. And when you push money, these guys will produce. The statistics is actually showing that we have wasted our money by putting it in the hands of small players. What the statistics is showing today is that agricultural exports, Nigerians' agricultural export value is about 4% or less than 4% of our proceeds from total exports. So it means that we've been like a rolling stone that gathers nothing. So what are these problems? Research and farmers' education, irrigation challenges, land use act. The government is the sole owner of land, soil management, pest, disease, and rodent control, infrastructure, good road network, managing markets. The biggest challenge for most farmers is the market. You know how cheap a tuber of yam is in Benue State during the yam season, or tomato in Benue State. If you decide to go into that sector, distribution of tomato and yam, and you're bringing it to mile 12 market, when you get to mile 12, that is when you realize that there are market makers. And these market makers did not go to school. These market makers will impound your truck. And you cannot settle this case with the police because they will tell you that. The police will tell you, go back to the market maker. So markets is a big problem. How they trade, how they sell, the way they sell. Some of the food that we eat today are poisonous food. Poison because the market sells things that are poisoned. I'll give us an example. Your cowpea, your beans. You know we love beans in this part of the world. So go to our major market hub and begin to observe how they trade, how they sell beans. They actually lace your beans with chemicals. They put chemicals inside. The reason is that if they don't put those chemicals, the pest that eats the Yoruba adage that says kokoro towa, for lower. that kokoro that eats the beans is inside the beans. So these guys have developed the act of what? Killing that kokoro. In an attempt to kill the kokoro, they put this chemical into it. Now, this chemical is actually rich in carcinogenic substance. So when we eat and boil these beans, we're actually invariably taking in what? Chemicals. Or how do they preserve your fish and your crayfish? They use sniper. to drive the flies. Because you can't put crayfish and flies will not come. So you see them spray. That thing they spray is sniper. And sniper is poisonous. But we keep internalizing. These are the kind of food. That's why we talk about the pre-upstream. That we need standards. We need control for this sector to actually thrive. Now, the interesting part of this narrative is that when you look at why we must care about food, why the time has changed, why we need to be afraid. Why we need to be afraid is that some of us will soon become endangered species because of the population explosion. So if you look at what the numbers are saying, it's saying as of today, Nigeria is 212.8 million people. 212.8 million people when you look at the statistics. And of this number, 43% of your total population lies within the age grade 0 to 14. What that tells us is about 92.5 million Nigerians are children. And these children, we must feed them with what? Protein. We must give them carbohydrate. We must give them food. We must feed them. But the farmers are actually not in the field minding that the numbers are blowing up exponentially, that the population is growing. We must feed our people. And in order to feed our people, we must change the narrative. Remember, agriculture is also linked. It's the only sector that is linked to food, clothing, housing, and medicine. It is the only sector that is linked. So unique. It is the only sector that is linked to what? If you look at the clothes that we put on, it is from cotton, from fiber, cotton fiber. If you look at the medicine, most of the medicine, you talk about malaria medicine. You've heard about the dogoyaro plant. So agriculture is the only sector that you can link to food, clothing, shelter, and wellness. Interestingly, what has been driving us as a country is the traditional farm practice. We know the traditional farm practice. It is a subsistent farm practice where we use cutlass and hoe. And we are saying, for this to change, Nigeria needs to move away from the traditional farming to what? To the smart farming practice. And when you look at the traditional farm practice, it limits growth in the sector and is characterized by low agricultural yield per hectare, poor farm practice, poor agronomic practice, lack of information and data gathering, absence of disease and pest control measures, absence of scale economics. It's all about scale economics. All of these things you find within the reality of the traditional farm practice. However, the new role, which I may not waste my time here because the new role is talking about technology, infotech, insurtech. We are looking at tech in agriculture. And I'll just show us how tech is changing the narrative. How we can have what? Rather than have hoe and cutlass tilling the soil, we can actually have what? Mechanization. We can have improvement in labor and farm mechanization, which can come through what? Rather than rely on government, we can also begin to think about partnering. We can begin to think about collaboration. We can begin to think about cooperative, farmers cooperative. How do we pull synergy in order to address some of those problems which we saw in the pre-upstream sector? We also talk about drone technology. Now, for the youths, smart youths that are here, the smart youths that are here, it is so difficult for IK to understand how to read, how to man the drone, and how to read, how to understand what the data is, the data that the drone is generating, how to understand it. I probably will not be able to do this now. But for the smart kid that is here, this is the area to go. You now need to begin to learn. Where do I learn it? Where do I learn about the drone technology? How can I use the drone technology to come up with remote sensors, satellite image of my farm? How can I use unmanned vehicles in our farms? Because people will pay you to use these services today. Interestingly, we have greenhouse farming coming up. Now, greenhouse farming is all over the place. The question is, if those pre-upstream conditions are not guaranteed, if there's no power, you're likely to run into trouble when you set up the greenhouse. Now, interesting when we look at statistics. Statistics says that when you look at mechanization, if you look at the most recent report from FAO Stats, it shows that Nigeria has less than 10 tractors per 100 square kilometer of arable land. So it tells you the story that mechanization, zero, that we are still doing the same old thing and expecting new results. To boost productivity and yield, the country must embrace increased use of smart technology. Now, this is where it becomes very difficult when you look at the numbers. You know, we talk about import and export, and we link this to your current exchange rates dynamics. If you look at the trend, you will see that Nigeria is actually importing more than she is exporting. And I'll just take us to the data, which explains it all. If you look at this data, one of the things you will see in Q2 2021, in our import data, you will see that Nigeria imported crude palm oil. Look at it there, crude palm oil. Nigeria actually imported crude palm oil. So even with the likes of Okomu, with the likes of Presco Farms, we are still importing what? Crude palm oil. Now this explains why your exchange rate is actually going haywire. So these are the goods. It tells us the opportunities that we have in the sector. I hope I'm doing well. Okay. So in concluding, I have not come to tell you about the different sectors to play in. I just want to let you know that agriculture is a very difficult space. Agriculture is a knowledge-driven space. Agriculture is 70% science, 20% experiential learning, hand-holding. You must learn. You must learn. So I'll give us an example. A farmer, I share this example mostly in class. A farmer has been praying to set up a poultry farm, and God answered the prayer, got funding, and he set up a 10,000 bed poultry farm. And every Sunday, every weekend, he will pull people from the church, come and see what God has done for me. As many persons that he's pulling to the farm, he's actually creating a problem for himself. As many persons he takes, he thinks that he's showing them that God did it. If you pray like me, God will do what? God will give you your own. As many persons he took to that farm, he was actually compromising the biosecurity of the farm. And suddenly the birds will start dying. And when they start dying, he will blame the devil, forgetting that agriculture is a knowledge-based sector. You don't need to take people to that farm because these people will introduce the virus that will kill the birds. So in closing, I leave you with the famous prayer from Genesis 27:28. It says, may God give you of heaven's dew and of earth's richness, an abundance of grains. And
okay, while we're waiting for the online questions to come, Doctor, is that what? I have questions here for you. The first question that came in said, can you please touch on financial investment for returns as regards agriculture? The benefits, which investment do you know, and many things. Okay. So can you please touch on financial investment for returns as regards agriculture?
I think he didn't. The person that wrote that question is actually referring to the farm crowdies of this world, digital agriculture, where they tell you to invest. If you invest 1 million, we're going to give you, you've seen as high as 40%, 35%, 25%. They tell you, oh, if you invest in the season, we'll give you as high as 25% returns on your investment or 40% returns on your investment. I want us to be very careful here. If you take my example, the example of cassava, it takes 11 months when you plant cassava. It takes 11 months. So let's assume I am investing your money in cassava, and I've asked you to give me money to do cassava farming. Now, I've invested on 1 hectare or acre farmland. Now, it's going to take me 11 months to think of harvesting. Remember, I must have an off-taker to buy my cassava. If I have an off-taker, remember, I have not added value. because they are going to buy my tuber crop. Buying your tuber crop does not guarantee that kind of returns that we're talking about. But if we're going to proceed to produce and process gari, we're going to produce gari, it will take us another, when we harvest, we process into gari, we will dry it. It will take us another, you add another 3 to 4 months. It means in 1 year, we have not started making money. We have actually not started making money. The only way I will guarantee that if you give me 1 million, I will give you 40%, is if I tell you, give me 1 million and give me 4-year moratorium. Give me 1 million and give me 4 years. The 4 years I'm going to plant palm trees. And the 5th year we will start harvesting. So the 5th year I will start paying you back. And remember, the palm tree has a 45-year gestation cycle. So it means that we're going to end for 45 years. So if I tell you the truth, give me 1 million, wait for 4 years, and we will end, we will take it as our retirement plan. That's when. So we should be very careful when we are throwing our investment into the digital space. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Doctor. Wow. Second question here says, how can we preserve groundnuts? And for how long can this be preserved? Is the shaft of the groundnut good for feeding pigs? Pests in dry shaft? Are there pests in dry shaft? Do they affect pigs? If they do, how?
So your question again, you're moving away from the upstream value chain, which is planting of groundnuts. Remember when we look at, so I believe they will share the slide. So when you look at the export potentials of Nigeria, you're not going to see groundnuts there. You're also not going to see groundnut oil. Remember, Nigeria used to be known for groundnuts, and Nigeria used to be known for groundnut oil. Now, our ladies, when they go to the market, what they see in the market is not groundnut oil. What they see is bleached palm oil. That vegetable oil you're seeing is actually bleached oil. So back to your question of groundnuts. You've moved away from planting groundnuts, and you're looking at processing groundnuts. Now, when you process groundnuts, you're going to process it. You use the same way you process coconut, where you make your coconut oil. You have the cold press and you have the hot press. So when you process groundnuts, you're going to take out the oil. The oil you're taking out is very rich and very expensive. It is called the groundnut oil. Now, if you're from the north, if you've ever taken kuli is the residue from groundnuts. When you take out the oil, you have the shaft. The shaft is either burnt, dried, and processed as kuli. But that dry part that you're talking about, you can actually process it as feed for animal feed. You can actually take it and add it as what? Add your cassava, add your to make your pig meal. So again, how do you process it? Processing cassava comes with, today, in those days you use the sun. But today we now have solar panels. Nigerians are actually producing dryers. So we have indigenous dryers that in a closed circuit you can actually dry you can dry the groundnut. But the truth about the question you asked is that you need to go back and learn. This question you're asking, you cannot get answers from me directly. You need to go back and research the groundnuts. You need to go to the market and ask questions. You need to go to Edo market first. Go to where the groundnut hub and see what those malams are doing with groundnuts. You need to go back and ask questions. Start from the market. Then get back to see whether there's an opportunity for you to play in that space. So you can also reach me. You can also reach me because I teach Agri-Business in Lagos Business School, and I run a course that we can actually open your eyes to more to that sector. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. There's another question here that I would like you to look. Well, I'll be part of those ones. It said, who can teach and mentor us in agri-business to avoid these losses? I guess that question is very obvious.
So that question is who can teach? So, there's a price. There's this song that says, no pain, no gain. No pain, no gain. So there's a price to be paid for knowledge. In order to learn, you need to do what? Prepare yourself. Just like you went through the 5 years or 4 years learning agriculture. By the time you come out, you realize that what they taught you in school is different from what you're going to meet on ground. So you now need to learn the business of what? Agri-business or the business of farming. So you need to come to class. The good news is that there are many schools. Olawale here was my student in the business school, and I think I have pastor here who also passed through the course. So please go to LBS website and find out about the LBS Agri-Business. It is currently the only course that has a grant of about 50%. So if you come on that program, you're going to meet mentors, you're going to engage with the stakeholders, the new kind of farmers that we're talking about. Thank you.
Thank you. I think this is the last question we can take. Can't see this in writing. So you mentioned about preservation of beans and crayfish. What is the acceptable standard to preserve these foods? Are there alternatives applicable by our subsistent farmers who actually produce and process these foods before they're taken to the market?
So currently we are talking about, in the last one, we've been talking about food security, food safety, ethics in agriculture. There are no standards. No standards. If you've ever visited Kenya, you discover that you won't find a meat seller. The same when you, on Broad Street in Lagos, you will see this meat seller carrying meat on his breast, moving around with all kinds of flies, must have perched the meat. And you see smart ladies touching the meat and pricing the meat. You won't find that kind of thing in Kenya. There are standards. There are rules. You cannot just carry meat in the open. Meat must be preserved, must be in a show glass, and people will buy directly from that. So currently, that question you asked, there are no standards. Anything goes in this market. I call the market an unstructured market. The market is waiting for standards. The market is waiting for certification. So if you're going to export things out of Nigeria, I give us an example. If you're going to export maize, if you're going to export groundnuts, that's when you will realize that they've been feeding us with poison, because your maize and groundnut will not fly. By the time they test it, they will tell you that it is rich in aflatoxin. And aflatoxin is one carcinogenic substance that we take in little by little. So you can't take it out of the country because they know they will test it. So the question then is, who do we run to? That's why we are talking to ourselves, that the players in this space need to begin to address the government to say, we need standards. People will not just wake up and begin to sell anything to the public. Take, for example, your chicken that you eat. You have two categories, frozen chicken and your chicken from your farm. So if you look at the frozen chicken, the ones that are coming from the neighboring countries, the question is, how do they bring those chicken in? They spend 3 days bringing them in without a refrigerated truck. So how come they don't decay? So they coat them with formaldehyde. They coat the chicken. Formaldehyde is the chemical you use to embalm corpse. So they coat them with formaldehyde. If you've ever visited Otta Market in the morning, you will see them using rag to clean the chicken. So what they are cleaning is a chemical that they use in preserving to be able to bring these things in. So these are issues. There are no standards. Currently, there are no standards. We don't know what we are eating. If you tell the lady to go to the market to buy palm oil, now challenge the palm oil seller that this thing you are selling, how come the color is different? You have 10 women selling palm oil. They have 10 different colors. Challenge the women and say, look, what you're selling is not the real one. What you will hear is that you want the real one. They'll bring the real one. They'll tell you what is expensive.
Thank you, doctor. This is very scary. It's indeed very scary. Thank you, doctor. We've run out of time. We can't take any more questions. I am petrified. What?